At 42,000 feet above the Gulf of Oman, the mission had settled into that deceptive phase where everything feels controlled. The aircraft was steady, the route was clean, and the timeline was holding perfectly. 90 minutes into the strike run, the crew had already passed the point where most missions either go wrong or smooth out. This one had smoothed out, until it didn't. Without warning, a new signal appeared on the display. A single emitter, positioned just 4 miles from the target, blinking into existence like it had been waiting for this exact moment. It wasn't in the pre-mission brief. It wasn't part of the expected threat picture, and that made it dangerous in a way known systems never are. The cockpit atmosphere shifted instantly. No alarms, no panic, just silence and focus. The mission commander paused mid-input, eyes locked on the symbol, running the classification process that would determine everything that followed. 2 seconds passed, but at that altitude on that timeline, those 2 seconds stretched longer than they should. Because this wasn't just a new radar, it was a question. And the answer would decide whether the next 7 minutes were manageable or impossible. When the classification came back, it confirmed exactly what the crew had hoped not to see, but also not the worst-case scenario they feared. The system was identified as a Tor M1, a highly capable short-range air defense platform designed to operate independently and respond quickly. On paper, it was a serious threat. It could track multiple targets, guide missiles with precision, and react faster than most systems in its class. But capability alone doesn't define danger. Range does. The mission commander immediately shifted from identification to calculation, running the numbers that mattered most in that moment. Altitude versus reach. The Tor's engagement ceiling maxed out at around 6 kilometers. The B-2 was flying at more than double that height. That single fact changed everything. The system could detect activity in the area, possibly even sense something unusual, but it physically could not reach the aircraft. The threat wasn't gone, but it was contained. The tension in the cockpit didn't disappear, but it narrowed into something manageable. The crew returned to their tasks, not relaxed but focused again. The timeline continued. 7 minutes to release, and for a brief moment it seemed like the situation had stabilized. But that stability was built on an assumption, and that assumption was about to break. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the radar signal vanished. The display cleared, the symbol disappeared, and the immediate threat seemed to dissolve into nothing. Inside the aircraft, the reaction was subtle but real. This behavior was familiar. Air defense operators often shut down their radars when they suspect they've been detected, especially to avoid drawing in anti-radiation weapons designed to home in on active emissions. It was a logical move, and one the crew had seen before. For a moment, it even felt like confirmation that the system had chosen survival over engagement. But that interpretation carried a hidden risk, because what disappeared wasn't the system, it was only its voice. The Tor hadn't left its position. It hadn't stopped defending the target. It had simply switched from visible to invisible, and that transition is where the real danger lives. The aircraft's defensive systems rely on detecting emission signals, something to track. But when a system goes silent, it removes itself from that picture entirely. What looked like safety was actually uncertainty. And uncertainty, at this stage of the mission, is far more dangerous than a known threat. On the ground, the operator made a deliberate choice. Instead of relying on radar, he shifted to a passive tracking system built into the platform but rarely emphasized. Thermal imaging. No emissions, no signals, no electronic footprint. From the aircraft's perspective, the sky was now clear. But from the ground, the search had just begun. At high altitude, the environment works in favor of thermal detection. The surrounding air is extremely cold, creating a near-perfect backdrop for identifying even faint heat signatures. The aircraft itself is designed to minimize that signature, with systems that reduce exhaust temperature and disperse heat. Under most conditions, those measures are effective. But not all conditions are equal. If even a slight atmospheric effect forms behind the aircraft, something as subtle as a partial trail, thermal contrast can reveal what radar cannot. The operator scanned methodically, sweeping the sky in controlled patterns, following training that assumed targets might be invisible to conventional systems. On one of those passes, something appeared. Not a clear track, not a lock, but enough to suggest presence. And that was all he needed, because his objective wasn't to engage, it was to inform. And that decision changed the entire dynamic of the mission. Recognizing the limits of his own system, the operator chose not to act alone. Instead, he reached outward. Communication replaced engagement. A short transmission carried the essential details: direction, estimated altitude, and movement. Nothing complex, nothing precise, but enough to guide attention. Several kilometers away, another system was waiting. The SA-6 battery had remained inactive, preserving its position, avoiding detection, and waiting for a moment exactly like this. Unlike the Tor, it had the reach. It could engage targets at significantly higher altitudes and at longer distances. The information it received wasn't enough to fire, but it was enough to begin searching. Inside the aircraft, none of this was visible. The defensive systems detected signals, not conversations. The sky still appeared clear. The mission continued as planned, but the reality had shifted. The threat was no longer limited to a system that couldn't reach them. It had expanded into something coordinated, something layered. And with 5 minutes remaining, the margin for reacting to that change was already shrinking. The first indication came as a brief pulse, a radar signal, short and controlled, appearing and disappearing within seconds. Then another, same direction, same pattern. This wasn't routine scanning. It was intentional, focused, almost cautious. Inside the cockpit, the mission commander recognized the pattern immediately. This was a system trying to confirm something it already suspected, not searching blindly, but verifying a lead. That realization carried weight, because it implied that somewhere, somehow, their position had been compromised. The Tor system, now silent, was no longer the primary concern. It had become part of a larger chain. The SA-6 was probing, testing the airspace in measured bursts designed to minimize its own exposure. Each pulse was a calculated risk, both for the system on the ground and the aircraft above. The crew understood the situation instantly. They weren't being tracked yet, but they were being hunted. And that distinction matters. With 4 minutes remaining, the mission was no longer just about reaching the target. It was about doing so before the search became a lock. At this point, the mission was no longer defined by a single threat or a single objective. It had become a race between multiple timelines, each moving independently but converging on the same outcome. The first clock was the SA-6 system, continuing its intermittent scans, getting closer with each attempt to resolving a usable track. The second was the target itself. Intelligence suggested that any delay could allow critical assets to be moved or hidden, reducing the effectiveness of the strike. Every second spent hesitating increased that risk. But the third clock was the most unexpected. Friendly systems operating in the region had shifted into a heightened defensive posture, scanning aggressively for potential threats. These systems were not designed to distinguish perfectly between all possibilities in real time. And at the exact moment the aircraft would need to open its internal bays, temporarily increasing its visibility, it would be entering the most sensitive phase of that scan cycle. The mission commander had to align all 3 timelines. Too early and the strike fails. Too late and detection becomes likely. Too exposed and consequences escalate beyond the mission itself. The decision wasn't about choosing a safe option. It was about choosing the least dangerous one and committing to it completely.